Welcome to lesson number 5. Today we're going to take a pretty big step and start talking about the musical alphabet. We're going to say goodbye to the black keys for a little while and start playing with the white keys. So every white key has a letter associated with it. Starting at the lower end, it begins at A and goes up through G. After G, instead of going to H, this pattern of A through G is repeated up the keyboard and down the keyboard. Each set of these notes is called one octave. If you look at the combination of black keys that surround any given note, say this note D, you'll notice that they're going to be the same for any other D throughout the keyboard. Recognizing these patterns of black and white keys will always allow you to figure out what key you're pressing, since, for example, all D keys will be between the groups of two black keys. All C keys will be just to the left of these two black keys, and all E keys will be just to the right of these two black keys. You don't need to memorize where every key is at this point. As we move forward, you'll learn this gradually. So going back to octaves, let's look at that D key again. An octave doesn't necessarily need to go from A to A like I showed before. An octave can go from any note to the next note up or down the keyboard, as long as it's the same letter key. For example, if we start at the center D key and move up to the next D key, that would be one octave. If you go down from that D key to the next lower D key, that's going down one octave. One octave, in this example going from D to D, will contain 8 notes, which is where the term octave comes from. We can also go 2 octaves between keys, or even 3. In all our previous exercises, I was always pointing to a particular key whenever I showed you the hand layouts. I called this the middle of keyboard, but in actuality, this is called middle C. Where this name comes from should be pretty obvious in that this is a C key, and it's relatively in the middle of the keyboard. But middle C is special. For example, we don't call this middle D or this middle B. Middle C is particularly important, but we won't go into why just yet. For now, just remember where it is. We're going to use it as a reference point, so get familiar with where it is on the keyboard. Right now, I want you to pause the video and find middle C. So let's look at our first exercise. This will be very similar to what we've done previously, except now we're moving our fingers to the white keys. Look at the keys at the top and put your fingers where I show. Each hand will be playing on the notes C, D, and E, but one octave apart from each other. Notice that in the notation I've taken away the finger numbers for the most part and replaced them with the note names instead. I put finger numbers on some of these notes to help you out, but when you're playing this, try saying the note names aloud instead of the finger numbers. Before we play this, notice that there's a new dynamic symbol at the beginning that shows an MF. So you already know about piano, which is soft, and forte, which is loud. Let's look at some of the dynamics that rest in between these two. First, we have an MP, which stands for mezzo piano, and that means moderately soft. Similarly, we have an MF, which stands for mezzo forte, or moderately loud. Going to the quiet end, you can have 2 Ps, which stands for pianissimo, or very soft. You could also have 2 Fs, or fortissimo, which means very loud. If you want to get really crazy, you could see a triple P, which stands for pianissimo, meaning extremely soft, or a triple F for fortissimo, which is extremely loud. So from top to bottom is the order of increasing volume. In actuality, it will be extremely rare that you would run into anything louder than a fortissimo or softer than pianissimo. But just know what these symbols mean if you come across them. It's kind of hard to describe exactly how loud you should be playing with each of these, and for example, one pianist mezzo forte might be a little louder than another pianist mezzo forte. It's not really an exact science. For now, try this. Technically, we don't have a volume that is right in the middle of all this, but use mezzo forte as a normal or average volume level. Consider pianissimo as soft as you can possibly play, and consider fortissimo to be as loud as you can possibly play. If you use these as your reference volumes, you can kind of figure out the volumes in between. For example, if mezzo forte is your average volume, mezzo piano will just be a little bit softer than that. Lastly, if a piece does not give you a volume to play at, assume it to be mezzo forte. So let's get back to the exercise. This is how this should sound. 1, 2, 3, 4. As always, play it yourself a few times, then rewind and play along with me. This next exercise has us using the notes F, G, and A with the left hand, and B, C, and D with the right hand. Notice that this piece has several vertical lines separating some of the notes. These lines are called measure, or bar lines, and they separate the notes into groups of equal beats. Each of these groups is called a bar, or a measure. I've always preferred the term measure, so that's what I'm going to use. So this would count as one measure, this would be one measure, and so on. Look at each measure and count the beats. Every measure has 4 beats. It doesn't always have to be 4 beats per measure. For example, some pieces may have 3 beats per measure or 2 beats per measure. It all depends on the piece, but we'll go into more detail later. For now, just know that every measure will have the same number of beats. Separating the notes into measures keeps things very clean and organized and makes the music easier to reference. For example, you could say to your teacher, "I'm having trouble with this piece starting on measure 5," and they can go right to that spot in the piece and help you out. It may not seem very useful right now, but our exercises have been extremely simple so far. As you get into more complicated pieces, you'll see how important measures are. So let's get back to the exercise. This is how this should sound. 1, 2, 3, 4. Before moving on, let's talk about the recount versus 4 count. Remember that I said some pieces might have 3 beats per measure and some may have 4 beats per measure. Those aren't the only 2 options, but they are some of the most common. 3 count just means that we have 3 beats per measure, and 4 count means we have 4 beats per measure. Depending on if a piece is 3 count or 4 count will change how we count into each exercise or piece. Before, I always just said 1, 2, 3, 4, and then started playing. Now, I will either count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the reason I count through twice is to establish to you whether or not we're going to be using 3 count or 4 count. So here is an example of 3 count. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And here's an example of 4 count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. From now on, I'm going to count into exercises in one of these ways. Now we're going to get into our next note type. This is called a dotted half note. In the British system, this is called a dotted minim. This has a value of 3 beats. If we played 4 dotted half notes, this is how this would sound, with me using 3 count. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So let's look at an example that uses dotted half notes. Notice our fingers are back to using C, D, and E in each hand. Also notice how in this exercise we only have 3 beats per measure instead of 4 beats. So this is how this exercise would sound. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So far we've only used 3 fingers on each hand. Now we're going to upgrade to using all 5 fingers. We're going to use what's called the C 5-finger scale, also called the C pentascale. And it looks like this with your right hand. Without getting too complicated, a scale just refers to a group of notes that generally sound good and work well together. In this case, the notes C through G represent the C 5-finger scale. It runs from your thumb on C to your pinky on G. With your left hand, you'll put your pinky on the lower C and your thumb on the lower G. Usually with the right hand, your thumb will be on middle C, and your left hand will be 1 octave lower than that. Now, both hands are using a C 5-finger scale. Pause the video and get both your hands in the C 5-finger scale. In this scale, each finger is still only dedicated to 1 key, just like before, so once you have your hands settled, you shouldn't need to move your hands at all. Also, remember what I said in lesson 2 regarding not letting one finger help another finger if it's weak. If you're supposed to play a note with your pinky, use only your pinky. Here's a simple exercise with the right hand only. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And here's the same exercise, but with the left hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of the pieces in this lesson's worksheet are going to have you using both hands in the C 5-finger scale, so watch out for that. The last piece of this lesson has us looking at the F 5-finger scale, also known as the F pentascale. This is something that we'll be using with the left hand only, at least for now. And it has you placing your pinky on the F below middle C and placing your thumb on middle C. Remember how earlier I said to remember where middle C was, and this is a good example of how helpful that can be. When I tell you to put your left hand on the F 5-finger scale, you might not remember where that lower F is yet, but knowing that your thumb should be on middle C will help you get your hands in the right spot. Pause the video and place your left hand on the F 5-finger scale. So here's a simple exercise using your left hand in the F 5-finger scale. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. In this lesson's worksheet, we're going to see some pieces where the C 5-finger scale is used with the right hand, and the F 5-finger scale is used with the left hand. In that case, your fingers will look like this. You'll notice that middle C is actually shared by both thumbs. So if we're playing a C, how do we know which thumb to use? Well, you have to read the music. If the music shows a C in the bottom with the stem down, you'll play it with the left hand. If it's shown at the top with the stem up, you're going to play with the right hand. This might seem silly because whether you use your left or your right hand, it's going to sound the same. However, right now we're learning to read and understand the music in front of us. So if the music shows that it should be played with the left or right hand, we should follow that. You'll notice that these two notes are not horizontally aligned, even though they are the same note. This is perfectly normal. The right hand stuff is going to stay towards the top, and the left hand stuff will stay towards the bottom. That's it for this lesson. I realize this is a pretty big lesson. There's a lot of new information, and it might seem like information overload, so don't be afraid to watch the video again. Also, be sure to do the worksheet that goes along with this lesson. Be sure to email me with any questions you might have. Thanks for watching. See you next time.